What's going on, everyone? Mecha here, and welcome to the Fire Emblem Christmas Cavalier tier list. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you want to call it. I hope you have a good time. I hope you're enjoying this time with your families and or loved ones. I'm recording this way early actually, but I just had this idea of making a Christmas Cavalier tier list and I couldn't wait to execute it, so I'm just going to do it now. So I've made tier lists on this channel before, using the FE tier list maker, link is in the description. But usually I just take all the characters from one game and divide them over different tiers. This time I'm going to be rating just the Christmas Cavaliers, just the red and green Cavaliers that usually join you early on. You know, the iconic duo, the characters almost everyone knows from that game. Very beloved characters usually. And we're just going to see where they all rank based on gameplay utility. I'm not going to be rating them based on, you know, their characters, their supports, or their role in the story. Literally just how good they are at fighting compared to the rest of your squad. Yeah, let's just hop into it basically. So I got Noish here, Elba, Alan, Kent, Forde, Kieran from FE9, Kiran from FE10. I got Kane here, two versions actually. This is going to be the one from Shadow Dragon, this is going to be the one from FE12. There's no actual Shadow Dragon portraits in this one, these are the portraits from FE12. These are the ones from FE3. But since almost nobody plays FE3, I thought it would be better to use these to rate the Shadow Dragon's versions instead. And then last we got Sully from Awakening, and then here I got Alec, I believe this is Kine, Lance, Sane, Kyle, the two Oscars, the two Abels, and then I got Stahl, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. So these are from all the games that I'm somewhat familiar with, some a little bit more than others. Let's see how they rank. Let me count this real quick. I got 6 tiers right here to divide them over. I don't know if I'm going to be using all of these, but we shall see. I guess I'll just start with the FE4 duo and work my way up from here. So Noish is an interesting one. I think, let's just get this out of the way. All of these are pretty much viable units. All these are pretty fairly good. Some of them are more dominant than others. Funnily enough, I think none of these Cavaliers are like super good, with like 1 or 2 possible exceptions. Almost all of them are like among the better units, but generally not the best units. And it tends to be because they have somewhat average stats. Sometimes those stats are good, but generally they are just like okay. There's usually like 1 or 2 more broken units in the game than them, but they have one of the better classes, and the class makes them stand out usually. The extra movement, sometimes the ability to move again, the ability to rescue, that kind of stuff. That's just what makes them stand out. So that's what makes them like generally useful. Like Noish, for example, he's a mounted unit in a game where mounted units are by far like the most important out of almost all of Fire Emblem. Like in FE4, if you're not a mounted unit, you're automatically like mid-tier at best because of how much of an advantage you have in that game. This advantage exists in all games, but in FE4 it's especially big. So the big problem with Noish though is that in FE4 you need Pursuit to double, and that makes him the only Cavalier on this tier list who cannot double attack reliably. He does have 2 skills that let him sometimes do more damage. He can crit, whereas a lot of other people cannot at first. And then he can also proc a cost, which is like a luck-based. It's kind of like having adepts. Not really, but without getting into deep, it's basically like having adepts. It's a little bit like that. So if you're lucky with Noish, you'll steal 1-round kill, but you probably won't. You're gonna need like a way to patch up his weaknesses, like the Brave Sword, aka the Hero Sword, or the Pursuit Band, something like that. That will let him double, but it takes a while before you get them and other people want them too. So that kind of makes him a little bit meh. So I'm gonna put him up here, like, you know, compared to the rest of the cast, I would still put him in B tier just because the mount is so useful and there are ways to patch up his weaknesses, but he's not looking great. Alec in comparison is about as good. I would say he's a little better than Noish. He does have the Pursuit skill, so he can double attack. The big problem with Alec is that he doesn't really have much else going for him besides, you know, he has like the 3 most important traits a Fire Emblem unit can have in FE4. He can double attack, he has a mount, and he can use swords as well as lances. So he can use the lightest weapon type, he can switch up weapon types, he can have 1 to range if he really needs to have it. But his stats are kind of lackluster. Most people complain about Alec's strength. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but it's definitely a huge problem. He definitely has some damaging issues over the game. He definitely needs like the Hero Sword as well to get 1-round kills, or like the Brave Lance, or something to patch it up, and it's not always easy to find those kind of things. So for that reason, I'm going to put him in B tier, but I'm going to put him above Noish, because I think he's a little bit better. He does more damage overall. Like if he doubles and Noish doesn't, which is usually the case, then Alec is going to do more damage. And that is really the most distinguishing feature between them. Noish is a bit more bulky though, I will say that much. Next we got Elba and Kine. These two are very similar. They're like most of these Cavaliers, they joined like very early, but for some reason in FE5 they decided to be different. Kaga just decided to be different, and he was like, you know what? We're not gonna let you join in Chapter 1. Instead, in Chapter 1, we're gonna give you 2 fighters instead, 2 really good fighters, and then we're gonna make these Cavaliers join like almost halfway through the game. But their bases will be almost like as if they joined in Chapter 1. So you get 2 very underleveled units, and FE5 is also, funnily enough, a game where being mounted is not that important. Whenever you go indoors in FE5, the game forces them to dismount, takes them off their horses, forces them to only use swords rather than the swords and lances they could normally use. Actually, the funny thing about these two is they're lance knights, they're not cavaliers even, so they can only use lances when they're mounted, and when they're dismounted they can only use swords, so they can never use both at the same time. Which kind of sucks. Their weapon levels are also very low, they can only use the most basic of weapons. Their growths are actually really good, even by FE5 standards. I would say they're above average at least, but their bases are pretty crap before their join time, and for that reason I think they'll end up among the worst of this tier list. I'm just trying to decide whether they go in D or F. I feel like no Cavalier can ever truly be F tier, but at the same time I do feel like these are probably among the worst units in FE5. There's maybe like 3 units I could think of that are worse than these two, so I'm gonna preemptively put them in F tier, because they're really bad. They are really that bad. They're really not that great. Sometimes I feel like some games are like they have sort of a Christmas Cav duo that joins early on. They have like some things that refer to it, like Halvin and Orson. One of them is like very rash, very brash, like Orson is, and then the other is calm and collected, like Halvin is. And sometimes people think that that is what makes the Christmas Cavalier duo, but no. Like this guy is red and mounted, and this guy is green and mounted. These are guys on a horse. This is literally the Cavalier duo. It's never been more clear than that. So I'm only gonna put actual Cavaliers on this. Like some people might say, like, hey, put the ninjas from Fates on here, like Kagero and Saizo and Kaze. Like they're the red and green duo. That game doesn't really have any Christmas Cavaliers, but no, only real Christmas Cavaliers on this one. Next duo is clearly a pair of Christmas Cavaliers. This is Alan from FE6 and as well as Lance from the same game. In FE6 they're pretty good. Depends on your mode of play, of course. The big problem for these guys in FE6 in particular, the first thing that comes to mind to me, is their stats are pretty good. They have some fast supports that work well together. Being mounted is really good in that game. You have like Kanto and you can rescue people. It's all really good. The big problem for these two is the promotion item. You get a Night Crest in FE6. And that's the problem. You get a Night Crest in FE6. The first one you get is in Chapter 8, which is pretty early. Yeah, it's Chapter 8. Yeah, I'm remembering that correctly. So you get one early one. But then you don't get another one until like Chapter... Generally, for most people, it should be Chapter 15. It might be Chapter 14... Yeah, maybe. So basically what happens in FE6 is you get Night Crest from Percival's Knights if you recruit Percival. But generally people do not recruit Percival until the end of Chapter... the end of Chapter 15 is basically when you get that Night Crest for most people. Some people will get it like earlier, but that's only if you're not playing hard mode and you're like really fast. So generally most people will get it like the start of Chapter 16 basically, which is very late for a promotion. So the funny thing is, even though these two, they boost each other through supports, they also hurt each other by being present because you can only promote one of them. So the first Cavalier is basically really good, but then the next one has like diminishing returns for adding them to your team, because by adding the other one to your team, you create a problem with their promotion items. If you only use one Cavalier, you only need one promotion item, you're good. But like, if you're already using Alan, you already decided I'm using Alan, and you decide to add Lance to your team, either you're going to make Alan worse by adding him, because, you know, Lance wants the promotion item, or Lance is a worse unit, and you might not want him anymore. So that's a funny dilemma you're into. Personally, my favorite way to use them is like, you get the support early on if you want to build supports, if you want to play like that, and then you kind of ditch one Cavalier at one point, and you just go on without him, or you keep him as like a support bot, a rescue bot, but you focus on one as your like primary damage dealing guy. They are very good at fighting. Don't get me wrong, they're fairly decent hard mode units. There are more broken units in the game for sure. Like, they're not as good at fighting as Rutger is. I would say Deke has a slight leg up on them for a lot of the game. Like Percival, Milady, they're much better, but they're about next. They're about next. So I would put them in like A tier. I think they're about that level. As for which one is better, I think that's actually a funny thing we can check, is we can see which one is better between the two. So far the greens are winning, but honestly these two are like almost the same unit, so I don't even know if this counts. I'm just gonna say these are tied basically. But between these, it's funny because if either both or neither are doubling, and this goes for a lot of these Cavaliers, I'm sure, because usually there's one speedy one and one with more strength, right? So if both or neither are doubling, which I think is most of the time in like FE6 hard mode or even FE6 normal mode. Like in FE6 normal mode, they will both generally double at some point, and in FE6 hard mode, neither of them will double very reliably. But if there's one that's doubling, it's obviously Lance, and if he doubles, obviously he's a lot stronger. In FE6 normal mode, he can double right off the bat, so that will make him stronger early on. But as soon as Alan starts doubling, he surpasses that Lance for the rest of the game. So it's really finicky. And I would say overall, most of the time, I think Alan will be better at, you know, dealing more damage, because the gap, the benchmark for one of them doubling but not the other one is pretty small, and most enemies will fall outside of those ranges. So most of the time I think Alan would do more damage, and that's like the biggest difference between them. Okay, next we got Kent and Say. Now if you've watched my FE7 draft race stream with Kirby Masta, Gwimpich and Viken, then you might remember that I got a horrible Sane, but that was on Hector normal mode. That was an early promoted Sane with no limb mode, and not quite representative. He was like speed screwed by 3 points at one point, so it wasn't very representative, but it still kind of soured my opinion on him quite a bit. I will say it makes a really big difference whether you play limb mode or not, and how you play limb mode or not, how good these two are. Because I feel like if you don't play limb mode, then for example Lone is much better, and these two, they're still good. I would still put them like in the higher regions of the B tier, or maybe even in the A tier, but behind these for sure. But if you play limb mode, they join like 6 levels higher than they would auto join at their like auto level. Like I think they auto level to like level 4, level 5, or like with set Hector mode bases basically. Those bases are pretty trash. They're not great. They're usable, but they're not great. I'm not gonna lie. They take some time to get them to like a high level, to the point where they can hold their own really. But if you train them in limb mode beforehand, and you have access to like all kinds of things, if you do that, like first of all they get like 6 extra levels out of that alone, so that's super good. Their stats will be much better because of that. You have access to an Angelic Robe you can give to them if you want, or the Energy Ring if you want to. You can also give those to other people, but they are fairly good candidates. Not the best. I think Florina's like the best candidate, but they're right behind basically. And then there's also a Night Crest in limb mode that you can use, Wallace's Night Crest. And if you use that on those, they're basically pre-promoted units. Of course, only one of them can get it. Same problem as with Alan and Lance, is there's only one Night Crest. But the Cavalier you give the Night Crest to will be really good. It's like getting a second Marcus, basically. Depending on how many levels they get before promotion, they might even be better. So if you get that, I think they're easily S tier. But that kind of implies almost soloing limb mode with them just to get enough XP. And if they're like level 10 promoted, they're not as great. Like if they're level 15 promoted, it's like it's getting a second Marcus. But if they're like level 10 promoted, it's more like getting a Zealot in FE7, if that makes sense, which is a lot less powerful. So overall, I would say they're like average out to about this tier. Now, which one of them is better? I think Sane is definitely the better one between these two. Despite that horrible FE7 draft race, I still think Sane is a bit better. He's like just like with these two. As long as they both double, Sane is going to deal more damage no matter what, and the speed gap between them is like 1 or 2 points. It's not that big, and then like maybe like 10% growth or something. It's not that big of a deal. Kent is definitely faster, but not by so much that Sane doesn't double. There are some things that Kent can double, but not that many. And Sane has so much strength. He can be so strong. He just needs to not get screwed, basically, which will happen to me once, which is why I'm biased, but I still think Sane is the better one. You better not disappoint me next time I use you, though. Now we got Forde and Kyle. Now, I have made no secret of the fact that I hate Forde, okay? Like, if you see my Forde rant, you know I hate him. Now, that rant is mostly tongue-in-cheek. I do really hate Forde as a character to use because, well, if you look at these characters, you'd expect, like, this is what you expect out of a Cavalier, right? Especially a GBA Cavalier, this is what you expect. But I think Forde is definitely a fair bit worse, and I think my expectations for Forde were just so high when I first started using him, and he's never lived up to those expectations. Even when I played on 100% growths, Forde still managed to disappoint me. Kyle is not that great either, but he's still okay. Like don't get me wrong, these are not bad units. They're not bad. They promise more than they can live up to, and that is a big problem when you're like some of the best classes in the game. They do have the option of promoting the Great Knight instead of Paladin. I think that's kind of a joke option though, because they actually get -1 move instead of +1 move. Why would you ever want that? Like, I know you get access, I know you get like slightly better stats, but it's really not worth it. Movements can be converted into those stats effectively. So you don't want Great Knight, you want Paladin. So I'm basically judging them as Paladins. I would say they're like B tier. They're like good. So which one is better? I think Kyle's definitely better. The speed gap between these two is really small, but Kyle has a big advantage in everything else that matters. He has significantly more HP and strength and bulk in general, as far as I remember. I analyzed them like plenty of times, and this is just off memory. But I remember Forde has like no real discernible edge over Kyle. I think like he has like 1 more speed at base, but Kyle has 1 more con. So if they're using like a steel sword or a javelin, Kyle's already like equally fast, which is really pathetic. So yeah, I think Kyle's definitely the better one here. So if we look at like green versus red, if you assume these are a tie, right, then the greens are definitely winning here, because we got 3 green winners and then we got 1 red winner here. Then we got Kieran and Oscar from FE9. Now these are busted. I'm just gonna straight up put him here. Maybe not Kieran. Kieran could be argued to be like A tier instead of S tier, but Oscar is one of the most busted units I've ever seen. Now, normally I would reserve S tier for like Titaniel and like Seth and that kind of unit, but obviously those are not going to be in this list. So I want to make it clear there's a gap between these two like tiers, all right? Because okay, so first of all, Oscar joins in the very first map, just like the other good Cavaliers, like these guys. But his stats are so good. He can only use lances, but that's pretty like run of the mill in that game. And he can promote and then use something else. Generally, people pick axes. I imagine a conversation between 2 developers of that game basically went like, hey, how about we give mounted units the ability to move after attacking, you know, like the old games. You know, does that sound like a good idea to you? And the other guy is like sarcastically, he goes like, man, if you do that, you might as well include like I don't know, a whole item that gives them +2 defense and then +2 res, and then it also increases their speed growth by 30%. Like that's what you're doing there. And the guy's like, oh, okay, I'll do that. I'll add a night ward. Yeah, sure. And then the guy's like, no, if you're gonna do that, you might as well give him a choice on what to use after promotion instead of just giving him 1 weapon type. The guy's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I was like, no, I'm being sarcastic, but the guy has already implemented it. That's how they balance the Cavaliers in FE9, I think, because that's how they work there, and it's super broken. Oscar also has an Earth affinity, so he can get supports with other people. Now, I know these other guys, they can all get supports that are reasonably good, but the Earth supports are something else. They give him, like, he can be unhittable at some points. Like, Oscar and Kiran carried Maniac mode for Mangs, like, so hard when we did Let's Play. It was insane how good they were. And the only reason Oscar died in that playthrough was because Mangs left him out of support range, I think. He died to, like, a Sword Master in the final chapter. But generally, Oscar is, like, invincible in the mid to late game. It's absolutely insane. Kiran is like almost equally good, honestly. The only problem with Kiran is that like all these Cavalier duos, they join like at the same time, but for some reason in FE9, Oscar joins in like chapter 1, Kiran joins in like chapter 11 or something. There's a huge gap between them, but once Kiran is up and running, and he joins at a level where he's basically up and running, so he misses a couple chapters of utility, but most of those are early game chapters that are very short, and there's not a lot of people around to begin with. And then once he joins, he's like level 12 or something at base level, so he doesn't even need like catching up or anything. He's good to go. His attack power is really high. They have 1-2 range. They have like javelins, hand axes, all that good stuff. These are really broken. I could see myself putting Kiran down here instead, but I think honestly they're just that broken. And like, did I mention how broken the Night Ward is and just moving after attacking and everything? That's so stupid. Now, the FE9 versions of them, they have different portraits. I really like FE9 and FE10 portraits, by the way. Did I mention that? Like, I like how, like, I saw Radiant Dawn before I saw Path of Radiance, and I always thought that they were they aged very nicely. It's not that long after FE9. Like, FE10 doesn't take place for long after FE9. But I always thought it was cute, like, how they aged a little bit. You can see they're a little bit older, but not too much. There's still a difference, but you can tell it's them. It's really cool. Anyway, so in that game, these units are clearly not as good. In FE9, mounted units have almost no drawbacks. There's a couple of maps where they are like really heavily impeded by like a mountain or a desert. Not that many though. FE10, there is like mounted penalties all over the place. You almost cannot go a map without some kind of penalty to mounted units, like ledges, forests, swamps. They're all over the place, and it really hurts like both Kiran and Oscar. They're in different armies now. They no longer have that mutual support. Instead, they can support with like everyone, so that makes the playing field pretty equal for them. Oscar still has the Earth affinity going for him, but Oscar is much less useful because, as I said, like there's a couple of chapters where you just cannot reach the latter half of the map. It's that annoying for mounted units. And then the other problem with these units is just availability, especially for Kiran. This is very annoying. The Radiant Dawn is divided into like 4 parts, and generally the Grill Mercenaries are around in part 3 onwards, and the Crimean army, which is what Kiran is in, they're like in part 2, and then they're in like the last little bit of part 3. And part 2 is very short. Part 3 is very long. Part 1 is very long too, but part 2 is very short. and Kiran is only around for like 2 maps in that part, so he's almost never around. So Kiran is not as bad as these other ones, but I'm gonna put him like C tier because he's really not around very much. And once he does join you, who is actually very underleveled and not very good, he has some trouble doubling. He's not very good in part 4 or in the final maps, so I think he's definitely a cut below these. He's still useful in the maps he's in, but he's definitely not as great. Oscar, I would put him like around here somewhere, maybe, but maybe nah. I'm not sure exactly where to put him here. I think I will put him here, just to make him better than Forde. But this is the first time there's like a tier gap between these Cavaliers, because I think Oscar, he's nice in part 3 for like early on when you have like few alternatives, but at some point in part 3 the broken units just take over and there's not a whole lot he can really help with. He can rescue drop a little bit, but there's just too much like annoyingness from like mounted penalties and stuff. And in part 4 again, they're not very spectacular. So that's Oscar for you. Then we got the OG duo, Cain and Abel. I can't really say much for like the FE1 or FE3 book 1 counterparts, so I decided to go with Shadow Dragon and FE12. At least some people have played those games. And I mean, Cain in Shadow Dragon and Abel in Shadow Dragon, they're not very far apart. The big difference between them is the weapon levels. Abel joins with, let me think here, he has D lances and D lances and E swords, and Cain is the reverse. He has E swords, no, he has E lances and D swords. There we go. And the big difference is like, and like, they have like, of course, there's a little bit of a speed gap between them at base. So Cain is a little bit slower than Abel. The big problem for Abel, well, there isn't really a big problem, I guess. The big problem for Cain is that he cannot use javelins at base because they're D rank, and then he's also further away from higher rank lances like the Rider's Bane win. And like the Rider's Bane is very important for lance units in FE11 in Shadow Dragon, because that game is all about using effective weaponry and using forges and stuff like that to one of KO things. And if you can't use a forged weapon, then you're immediately like, you can't one kill enemies. And like sometimes it feels like the only way in Shadow Dragon to one round KO anything is effective weaponry. Of course, he has like he's got easier access to something like an armor slayer or some other effective weapon that's like a sword. But the problem is there's less of those and they're less good, because the weapons they're effective against, or the enemy types they're effective against, are the, you know, the Cavaliers and the Armor Knights and the Generals, and those are all classes that generally just use lances or swords, and against both of those a lance will be better than a sword. So you can take advantage of weapon triangle, get better hits, get much better damage. Like even the little bonus you get from weapon triangle, the +1 might, that only works, that gets tripled with effectiveness, because effectiveness is tripled in that game. And yeah, it feels like a very small difference at first, but it just cascades into a bigger advantage for Abel. So for that reason, Abel is significantly better than Cain. I would actually put a tier between them. I think Abel, he still needs some work to get good, and he's not part of like the most efficient playthrough of FE11 possible, but I would say he's still fairly good. I even saw him get some use in like the Dawn on 0% growth run. So I would still put him in like the very lowest region of the A tier. And then Cain, I would put him more like around here somewhere. Definitely around Oscar's level seems, like FE10 Oscar's level seems about right. I would say Oscar's better. I'm kind of hesitating here on exactly where to put him. I do feel like Kyle has an easier time in FE8, but that's because FE8 in general just has a lot of weaker enemies. So it's not that like Kyle is much better in comparison to his peers compared to like Cain. Although Cain is like a lot of really shitty peers, so maybe that's not fair either. I don't know, it's kind of a tricky one. I'm gonna put him here for now, I think. I think he's still pretty decent, but he's not great or anything. I'm gonna move him down a bit here because he's not that great. I definitely think Abel is the better one though, by far. I think I'm gonna put a tier between them. There's enough of a difference. So we're down to like the last few, so let's see what the score is right now. So here green is like 1-0 up, and then here they're down a bit, so it's like 1-1, 2-1. Here green wins like an entire tier. Is there another tier gap between them? I thought it was like one more when it was like a tier gap. Oh yeah, it was like Kieran and Oscar. That's a pretty gap actually. It's a pretty big gap. Yeah, I would say green is winning then, because I think they're about tied for the most part. But then this tier gap is here, it just destroys everything else, and this tier gap is here as well. So yeah, green is winning right now, winning by a pretty big margin. So yay, green Cavs. Then we got the FE12 equivalents of these. Now in here, Cain definitely takes his revenge, because he joins in like chapter, I think it's 8, the bridge. It's actually a chapter where I'm at right now in the new mystery playthrough. So I haven't really used him yet. I know he joins in the prologue too. He's around there for a little bit too, if you go his route. So he is there. Abel, on the other hand, joins very, very late. He's a pre-promote actually in this game. So he joins very late. I could have put like Rhodey and Luke here, but I didn't feel fitting because these two are really the OG duo. So we're going to go with these two. And they only want one pair per game. So new mystery is less about Forde's weaponry. It can be a little bit, but it's more about like just good positioning. And just, you know, mounted units are still king in that game. Don't worry, but they can't like rescue or anything. It's like Shadow Dragon, but minus the dominance of Forde's weapons, basically, when it comes to enemy types. Kane is definitely better. I would say he's definitely like he's definitely worse than his Shadow Dragon equivalent because he joins later. His stats are alright. They're not great, but he can hold his own a little bit. Just needs a little bit of help getting kills. He doesn't one round everything, but he does alright. It depends on the difficulty, I guess. Like if I were to compare him to anyone, it would be like Kyle probably. I think he's about equal to Kyle. But that feels kind of weird because we got this other Kane here who is like, he's definitely better, this Kane, than this Kane. So maybe I should do like this again and then put him like around here somewhere. I don't know, let me know, new mystery fans, what you think, because I'm kind of in doubt here. I'm gonna put him here because I want people to be better than Forde, right? People to be better than Forde. And then Abel, I think he's definitely a lot worse. I think he's like depends on difficulty, of course. In like normal mode or something, he's fine, but he's definitely pretty damn bad in like lunatic and stuff. So I'm gonna put him like here or something. He really doesn't have that great of a stats for like a pre-promoted unit at that point in the game. You'd expect them to be able to hold their own. And if you can't, you pretty much can't fix them through like training or something. So definitely pretty bad. Alright, these are the ones I'm least familiar with, the Awakening ones, because I've only played Awakening like a couple times. I used Sully on my first Awakening playthrough, but that was on like hard mode or something. So it doesn't really mean very much. I thought she was alright, but definitely not definitely not fantastic. And then I've been just dominating with Robin for most of my other playthroughs. So not sure where to go with this one. I'm just gonna put her here and be done with it. I guess we can have a unit worse than Forde. She might be a little bit better than I'm giving her credit for right now, but I really don't know very much about her. I just wanted to be completionist on this. And style is like pretty much the same thing. I barely know anything about these two, so take this rating with a grain of salt. As far as I know, they're like trainable. They join early enough to where you can do almost anything you want with them. And Awakening growth in general is just very high, so you could just turn them into good units. That's pretty much what you can do with them. Just train them into good units. As far as I know, they're not great on Lunatic. They're definitely not like Frederick tier or anything, but not unusable either. So there you go. Got an empty tier right here. The D tier is completely empty, but I think that's deserved because these two are definitely, these are the only actual bad units on the list. Everyone else is like fairly good to like sort of usable, but not great. So I'm fairly happy with this tier list overall. I think it worked out pretty well, but you might have a different opinion. If that is the case, let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see another tier list, I'm actually down for doing that. So I'm definitely going to do that more often if you just tell me that you like it. Pressing the like button is also a good way to let me know that you like it, believe it or not. So yeah, that's about it for today. I hope to see you guys another time. Again, have a very good Christmas, have a very good time, and I will see you tomorrow, probably. Peace, and bye.